The first light of day came like a hesitant apology across the wide plains, brushing the horizon with a faint wash of rose and gold. From the porch of the Moran ranch house, the land seemed endless rolling grass, browned by late summer fence. Lines etched like faint scars, and a corral that sat quiet except for the slow shift of a single mare swishing at flies. Clara Bell Moran stood with a tin cup in hand, the steam curling from her coffee, only to be stolen away by the faintest morning wind. She didn't drink yet. She only stared toward the north pasture, as though the earth itself might speak if she held her gaze long enough. The air still carried the scent of last night's rain, though the ground was already dry beneath her bare feet. Somewhere behind her, the house creaked in the gentle wind, a sound that always felt like her late husband walking the halls again. She swallowed against the ache of it. 4 years a wife, 2 years a widow, and still she woke, expecting to hear his boots on the porch. But what she heard instead was silence, silence, broken only by the land itself. She dressed slow that morning, pulling on her work shirt and jeans, lacing her boots until the leather creaked. Today, she had to ride into town for salt, nails, and flour, 3 things she could not make herself. She didn't relish the trip. She knew what the town thought of her, and they made no effort to hide it. A woman keeping a ranch was, to their minds, a problem to be solved by pity, by persuasion, or by force. By mid-morning, the sun sat higher, warm enough to prick sweat along her neck as she rode in on her chestnut mare. The town of Redford was little more than a string of wood-fronted buildings along a dusty main street, but every porch and window seemed to hold eyes. She'd learned long ago that a woman alone made for a better show than a traveling circus at the general store. She tied her mare to the hitching post and stepped inside, the door's bell giving a hollow ring. Old man Brayer looked up from behind the counter, his smile polite but strained. "Morning, Mrs. Moran. Haven't seen you in a spell." "I've been busy keeping the place running," she said, setting her list on the counter. He read it, nodded, and shuffled to the back. She stood, eyes wandering the shelves, when she heard the low voice from behind. She's still hanging on. Then, the voice belonged to Rufus Cane. She didn't have to turn to know. His drawl was as oily as the pomade he slicked his graying hair with. "For now," another man chuckled, "but winter'll do her in, or taxes will." She turned then, meeting Rufus's pale eyes. He was leaning against a barrel of nails, arms folded, a smile that wasn't friendly. "Mrs. Moran," he said with mock courtesy, "you ought to think about sellin'. Land like yours, good grazing, don't belong to someone with no herd to speak of." "It's mine," she said simply. He shrugged, like that didn't matter. "Mine's just a friendly word. I'd hate to see trouble come your way." The bell rang behind her, and the sound of boots on the wood floor carried a different weight, measured, unhurried, like a man who knew no one would dare stand in his path. She turned slightly, enough to see a figure framed in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dust on his hat brim, and a shadow to his eyes like he'd seen 1,000 miles of trouble. "Elias Boone." He said nothing at first, just walked to the counter with the slow grace of someone who had never needed to prove himself. Brayer returned with Clara's supplies and began measuring out flour. That was when Elias's voice broke the quiet. "You leanin' on a lady for sport, Rufus?" His tone was easy, but the steel in it was plain. Rufus straightened from the barrel, smirking. "This ain't your affair, Boone." "Then walk away, and it won't be," Elias said. The store went still. Rufus glanced between them, perhaps calculating the worth of a public quarrel. In the end, he tipped his hat to Claire, mocking again, hand pushed out into the street. His laughter carried through the open door until the wind took it. Clara gathered her goods, paid Brayer, and left without a word to the cowboy who'd interfered. She didn't like the feeling of owing anyone, especially a stranger, but she saw him again that afternoon. Riding along the southern edge of her property, He slowed when he spotted her by the fence, hammer in hand. "Post is rotten," he said from the saddle. "I know," she replied. He dismounted without asking, took the hammer from her, and set to work. No talk, no questions, just the sound of metal striking wood, the creak of leather when he straightened to fetch another rail. She passed him nails without being asked, and when the sun dipped low enough to throw long shadows over the grass, the fence stood firm again. He drank from her canteen, then handed it back. "Winds shifting," he murmured, as if the land itself had told him. She wanted to ask him why he'd stood up to Rufus in town, but the words wouldn't come. He seemed the kind of man who didn't speak to hear himself, and she respected that. When he left, she watched him ride toward the horizon until the land swallowed him whole. That night, she sat on the porch with her shotgun resting across her knees. The stars were sharp above, scattered like cold fire. She thought of Rufus's pale eyes, of the way he'd said trouble might come her way. She thought of Elias Boone's silence, how it felt steadier than any promise. It was near midnight when she saw them, three shapes on horseback, lantern light swaying with each step. They were far off yet, moving slow along the fence line of her north pasture. She leaned forward, straining to catch the sound of hooves in the dry grass, but the distance kept them faint. They didn't come closer. They didn't need to. Just their presence in the dark, the way the lantern light winked and swayed, was enough to twist her stomach tight. She stayed there until they vanished into the black horizon, her coffee long gone cold beside her. The land was silent again, but she knew silence could be a warning just as much as a comfort. And tonight, it was the first. The morning after the lanterns came and went, the air felt heavier, as though the prairie itself had held its breath all night. Clara moved through her chores with a restless edge, feeding the mare, checking the chicken coop, hauling water, but her eyes kept drifting toward the north pasture. The fence there stood whole, the grass untrampled, yet she knew what she had seen. 3 riders did not wander the night for no reason. By noon, the sun was high and punishing, its glare bouncing off the pale boards of the barn. She saddled the mare and rode into town, the weight of her rifle slung across her back. The general store looked the same as yesterday, same bell, same shadows, but she bypassed it for the sheriff's office. Marshal Deke Halloran was leaning back in his chair, boots on the desk, hat tipped low over his brow. He lifted it when she stepped inside, his expression sliding from feigned surprise to mild irritation. "Mrs. Moran," he said, as though her name were an inconvenience. "I had riders near my pasture last night, 3 of them. They didn't belong there." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "This some neighborly dispute?" "No," she said. "It's Rufus Cane's doing, and you know it." Halloran gave a dry chuckle. "You see 'em cut your fence, drive off your stock. They were testing me," she snapped. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "A woman alone imagines a lot. Maybe you miscounted. Maybe you dreamed it." She stared at him, her pulse pounding. "You won't help. I can't act on shadows," he said. "Not in my line of work." She turned on her heel before she said something she couldn't take back. As she stepped into the street, sunlight flared off metal in the distant spurs, catching the light. Elias Boone was there, standing in the shade outside the livery, one hand resting on his horse's neck. He didn't speak as she approached, just watched her with that unreadable calm. "They were back last night," she told him. He didn't ask who. "They'll be back again," he said simply. Her throat felt dry. "Then I suppose I'll be ready." At sundown, a knock sounded on her door, not sharp, just 2 slow raps. She opened it to find Elias holding the reins of his horse, saddle cinched, rifle slung low. His eyes swept the yard, then came back to hers. "They'll come for the gate," he said. "Tonight." She didn't ask how he knew. He moved like a man who trusted his instincts more than he trusted the law. She stepped aside, and he entered without another word. The hours bled into one another as they walked the fence line. Lantern light pooling over the grass, shadows stretching long in the wind. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry rising, thin and lonely under the wide sky. Elias handed her his coat when the night grew cold, his hand brushing hers in the exchange. It was nothing, and yet her heart gave an unsteady beat. Around midnight, rain began soft at first, a whisper against the leaves of the cottonwoods. Then came the distant thud of hooves. 3 riders again, silhouettes black against the silvered grass, moving toward the corral. Elias's voice was low. "You take the right side." She moved without hesitation, her shotgun cradled against her shoulder. Rufus Cane's voice carried over the rain, coarse and mocking. "You think you can hold this place forever, Clara? I'm just here to take what's already mine." Lightning flared white and sudden, casting the men in stark relief. At the front, 2 hired hands behind. Elias stepped forward from the shadows, rifle steady. "You'll turn around," he said, his voice like gravel under boot. Rufus laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of the lady." Elias's stance didn't shift. "You take one more step, and you'll find out." The rain thickened, plastering Clara's hair to her face, but her hands were steady on the shotgun. "This land is mine," she called out, her voice carrying over the storm. "And I'll die on it before I give it to you." For a moment, no one moved. Thunder rolled across the plains, low and endless. Rufus's smirk faltered, just a fraction. His eyes flicked between them, the woman who wouldn't lower her weapon, and the man whose rifle never wavered. "You're makin' a mistake," Rufus said at last. "Leave," Elias told him. Rufus's jaw tightened, but he pulled his horse around. The 2 men behind him followed, their silhouettes swallowed by the rain until the night was empty again. Clara lowered her shotgun, her breath catching in the cold air. The lantern light flickered over Elias's face, the rain tracing dark lines down his cheeks. "You didn't have to do this," she said. He gave a slow shake of his head. "Some things you don't stand by for." She felt the words settle somewhere deep, heavier than the storm. As he turned toward his horse, she called after him, "Coffee at dawn." He paused, then looked back with the faintest ghost of a smile, before disappearing into the rain. She stood there long after he was gone, the wind pushing against her coat, the land around her holding its silence. Somewhere inside, she knew the fight wasn't over, not with Rufus, not with the town, not with the quiet ache that had taken root in her since her husband died. But tonight, the ranch still belonged to her, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and in the hush that followed, she looked out over the dark pasture. In the faint glimmer of the lantern's light, the wet grass seemed almost silver, as if the land itself had taken her side. She thought then of something her father used to say, that the West didn't give second chances, only the chance to stand your ground once. Maybe that was true. Or maybe, if you were lucky, someone rode in to stand it with you, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope she was lucky.